How are we doing today, y'all? This is your host, Jay Sanchez, the Renaissance Daddy, and we are here. And we're going to talk about boundaries. More specifically, we're going to talk about emotional boundaries. And before I do that, I want to stop and say, we're a little delayed on getting this one out, and I apologize for that. It's we were doing a couple different things. One, with the political races and stuff this week, it's been a little tough because I've been up a little late, to be honest, watching everything. And then secondarily, we are also adding in additional channels to this podcast. So we are now going to be distributing on YouTube as well as on Facebook. So you can actually take a look at the video stream as I also talk about this. So please go on out there. I'll leave the links in the description in terms of the YouTube channel as well as the Facebook channel, so that you can, have another option to kind of listen to this if you want to watch it as well. See my ugly mug while you listen to me. Anyway, so let's get into it. So we're talking about boundaries, right? So we can have a lot of different boundaries, and there's boundaries like emotional boundaries. There's physical boundaries. There's even your digital boundaries, right? So your personal boundaries, like could be like, that you don't like people getting too close to you, talking too close to you, touching your face. That's mine. Don't touch my face. I don't know what it is. Just don't touch my face. Even my kids don't touch my face. Those are kind of things that you get to your personal boundaries. They can even go as far as to say like who's following you, who's not following you, where they walk. Do they walk in front of you? Do they walk behind you? So these are just boundaries, right, that you have. You can go as far as and kind of go beyond that, right? How you kiss, where you kiss. Those are all like boundaries, personal, physical boundaries. The digital boundaries, obviously, they make sense, right? Who's looking at your phone, right? Do you share your password with your spouse? Can they get into your phone? I don't know. Our phones are deeply, deeply sacred in our world today. They create there's so much information on them right now and these days that it can kind of be a little anxious, but you do you. But I'm going to talk about is emotional boundaries. So you may look at me and say, okay, Jay, what are emotional boundaries? Like maybe maybe it's common sense, right? But very much like physical boundaries, they define a separateness. They're your yard line. They're your wall. If you have a property line in your house, they are that. Excuse me, I get too far from the mic. They are that, right? They are, that is your fence. That is your front yard, your backyard, your house. That's your boundaries. Those are your emotional boundaries. And what happens over time for a myriad of different reasons is that these lines can become confused, right? You get in a crowded neighborhood of emotions, and you now lose where your property starts and where their property starts, so on and so forth. Okay. And so you need to make sure that you maintain your property line, because you can imagine, like, if you lived in a neighborhood and like everybody's property lines were, you think your property line is here and he thinks his property line is there, it can get kind of chaotic, right? And you just got to imagine that your emotional property lines are in your mind, right? This is what your emotions are based on. And so if somebody's stepping on them constantly and consistently, or you're stepping on another's, it becomes chaotic in your mind and in your brain and in your heart and your soul. You end up being very, very, not in a good place, right? Do the same adage I always do. I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. This is my journey. And this is what I've been going through, or what I'm going through, or my journey through these different topics. And as I identify them in my world and in my mind and in my day-to-day life. Okay. So we talked about that, right? Lay of the land. What are emotional boundaries compared to other physical boundaries? What are personal boundaries, digital boundaries, things like that, right? So, your emotional boundaries, they're going to involve those ideas or those items where we're talking about, separating your feelings from another, another person's feelings, right? And violations of those feelings, they can, you know, you can take on the responsibility of another's feelings, right? You can, you know, let another person's feelings dictate your own, right? You can sacrifice your own needs to please somebody else. You can blame others. It's a big one. For those problems, right? And then obviously accepting responsibility for theirs, right? So you go, well, like that sounds kind of maybe similar. Maybe it is for me, right? If I go down that list again, right? Take responsibility for another's feelings. I made you get mad. I made you throw that, right? I made you feel ugly. I made you feel angry. I made you feel like you had to throw that dish. I made you feel like you had to do whatever. You see a correlation from the last podcast for domestic violence, right? If you don't have emotional boundaries, they kind of hand in hand. I don't know if you caught that, but I just did it. They go hand in hand. Okay. Taking responsibility, letting others, this is a big one for me, letting other feelings dictate my own. I used to remember when my spouse would pull up in the driveway, I would just literally have a sense of dread. And, you know, I loved this individual. It was very odd. Like how could it be dread? And it would be like, how did their day go? And they would walk in and they would be like, oh my God, my day went blah. And I would physically get ill. Like I would feel ill, like, oh, shoot. Sorry, I'll edit that out. Oh, shoot. Like, what do you do with that? Like I didn't understand. Like, how do you do that? Like, and the thing is that other individual, she didn't know, like, how it made me feel because I didn't communicate it, right? And you're like, well, you should have communicated, you know, dummy. Yeah, I should have. You're absolutely right. They didn't know how that made me feel. I didn't have the emotional capacity to take on another person's emotions, but yet I still asked. I still tried, right? And then you end up with this awkward, you know, like Mr. Roboto type of a kind of a conversation because you don't know how to handle their emotional output. That's not on them, it's on you. And it's not bad. I'm not saying it's on you in a bad way. It's just you don't understand how to deal with it. And, you know, it manifests in so many different ways. They can end up getting angry and blah, blah, blah. And so there's a whole bunch of different things. And then when they get angry with you because you didn't understand how to react to their bad day, right? You start blaming yourself. It starts affecting your self-esteem. It starts affecting your frustration levels. It starts affecting your every aspect of who you are and you define yourself as, right? You start to, you know, sacrifice, or you will eventually sacrifice your own needs just to please them, right? Whatever you need, right? You know, I know that I had, you know, because I came from abusive childhood where there was a lot of alcohol and alcohol abuse and things like that. And, you know, there was an emotional, like I would sacrifice that emotional barrier for them thinking that I was being a good person. But in all actuality, all I needed to do was communicate. Hey, when you have 6 glasses of whatever and you start acting like this, it brings back my childhood and I have an anxiety attack beyond belief. And it makes me 43, go back to being 9, 6, 5, whatever. And maybe that individual goes, I don't give a crap. Deal with it. Or maybe they care and they say, how can we compromise? Got to communicate though, y'all. Okay. So sacrificing your own needs and your own, you know, like, you know, that in that situation, if we're using the whole house and the yard adage, right? I leave my fence open Go ahead and let your pit bull just run wild in my yard and destroy my cats and birds and animals in my yard. It's okay. Yeah. No, it's not. Okay? You wouldn't do it in real life. Don't do it in your emotional state. Right? And then worse comes to worse, right? You start blaming others for your problems. I did this a lot. In the last 5-6 years, I've tried to not do this in most every aspect, but except for the one in my relationship. Or actually, it's more than probably like 10, 12, 13 years 14 years I've been actually really, because as I became a dad, I was really big on not to blame others for your own mistakes. But then when it came into my relationship, I would be so anxious to please another individual. I would be so in tune to cure like whatever's upsetting that other individual, that something bad would happen. It was, I didn't do it, they did it. Because I could not stand to have that individual upset with me. How do you fix it? We'll talk about it. Because I couldn't accept responsibility for things that I had done. I couldn't accept responsibilities for things that I would do. Couldn't accept responsibility for the fact that I just couldn't communicate, that I wasn't emotionally, I don't say mature, but emotionally adept enough to deal with my own emotions and then deal with theirs as well, right? And I'm not saying that their emotions were bad. I'm not saying my emotions were better. No, not at all. Not at all. What I am saying, though, is I didn't have the capacity at that point, right? I didn't have the capacity emotionally to say I need help. Because what if I say help and I become vulnerable and they look at me and laugh, right? Because I was bullied as a kid. I was bullied by my, DNA donor, right? Or my biological dad, right? Why? You look at it and go, you're 40-something years old. Get over it by now. But if you are not cognizant of there being a problem, if you're not cognizant that it actually could be a problem shared by the world, then you're not going to do anything about it. I promise you that. I didn't until I sat down one day and looked and go, oh my God, what? Other people have this as well? Other people deal with this as well? How is that possible? How? It is. It just is. Blaming others, not the answer. Accepting responsibility from others, not the answer. I made you mad. It's my fault. I made you, and I'll go as far as the domestic violence. I made you so mad you beat the crap out of me. I made you so mad you ripped my mirror off. I made you so mad you destroyed my car. I made you so mad you threw a plate. I made you so mad. It's my fault. I did it. It's me. No. Not anymore. Not anymore. There's culpability, true. But the correct way to deal with that beginning situation where my spouse would drive up in the driveway and I would get feeling the feeling of dread, right? Is to do what? They have a bad day. I had a bad day, blah, 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 blah. This person yelled at me. I yelled at this person. This person didn't do their job. I'm going to have to, cut head count here or there or whatever, right? Oh, wow. That is horrible. I can't even imagine how to deal with that or how to handle that, and talk through it. And at the end of it, go, okay, I'm going to give you some time to process on your own and let you deal with it. But if you need me, give me a buzz. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go play with the kids. And you have to be okay with doing that. You got to be okay with being okay. Not taking on their crap. They're on their side of the fence. You're on your side of the fence. Right? You're not going to just open it up and let everybody in. It's okay. And that's the thing that I've read and I've learned and I'm kind of really getting into, and I'm like, it makes so much sense. Why would I sit there and take on others' emotions? Why would I take on these fears? Why would I take on you having a bad day? That means I got to have a bad day. That's so stupid. I mean, I'm not, and if you're doing it, I'm not trying to talk bad about it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not judging you. I'm on me. Like, why did I do that? And if you're doing that, try to stop. We'll talk about how to stop. But I was like, oh, I'm so frustrated with myself sometimes. Because I look at it and I go, why do you do that? Don't take on other people's emotions. Don't take on other people's problems. Don't take on all of that. You can help them. You can have empathy for them or sympathy for them, right? You can talk through it with them. You can be a good human being and try to add joy. I'm not saying like, oh, you had a bad day, peace out, I'm out. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're able to walk away from that conversation and you didn't take that pain, that suffering, that anger, that depression, that sadness. You didn't take it. They didn't take it because it's not yours, it's theirs. Okay? They didn't just wrap up something in their backyard, toss it over the fence to you, and you're like, okay, it's mine now. If you're doing that, take a minute, pause. Shouldn't, right? Have those emotional boundaries. Because at the end of the day, when you don't, and all you're doing is trying to please, and you're trying to separate your feelings, and you're constantly having these violations, you're going to then start to, even if it's your core belief structure, to take responsibility and not blame others. You will begin to blame. Did you put this plate here? No. The dog must have done it. Yep. And I'm gonna tell you right now, the other individual knows, as sure as the day, as the day will end and the day will start and the day will end and the sky is blue and the sun is, whatever. They know that you're, fudging things a bit. You lose credibility with that individual. So when there is a situation where there is somebody else that did something, you've lost your credibility because you didn't want to admit to a plate that you put away. It may be wrong, right? Talk about it. Think about that. Just pause. Think about that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's big things in the world. And you're going to choose to, I guess, divert blame because you didn't put a plate away the right way. You didn't lift the seat of the toilet. Whatever. Those are things you got to really think about. You got to really get into and define for yourself the right way to deal with that. And so the first thing you can do is you're going to identify those boundaries. You got to identify your own boundaries. Your spouse can't do it. I can't do it. Your friend can't do it. Nobody can do it. Only you can do it. Only you can. Right? Communicate that. Don't over explain it and set consequences for yourself. Those are big things. Okay. So when we talk about emotional boundaries, we really kind of dig into some of the ways those things, and I can go into story after story. I mean, there was a story at one point where I lost a cat. True story, right? Lost a cat. My parents are visiting. They're listening to this going, this is it. And they came over and they were visiting and I couldn't find the cat. I hated this cat. I still hate this cat. If I see this cat, I just hate this cat. Anyway, the cat would always like hide and run and just, you could never find this cat. And it was like the most annoying cat ever. Well, the door was left open. And I believe at the time, I think my dad had left the door open or my mom had left the door open or something, and the garage was, something had happened. And my immediate reaction, because of other situations, was fear. Straight 4-year-old, 5-year-old, I'm a little kid, fear. Like I'm about to get my butt whooped. Fear. Now, mind you, I'm 42 years old at the time, 6 foot, right? And I have like just childlike fear. That's a whole different conversation, right? Related to that. That's the whole domestic violence type fear. But what was I going through, right? My emotional boundaries. I just started going through how much fear I was going to go through, and when that person came in, right? Because that person, I took on their emotions immediately. They're going to be mad at me. I'm going to have to take responsibility. But ooh, if I take responsibility, what's going to happen? But I can't give it to my parents because, what would she say about that, or what would this person say about that? And then, oh my God, and then I'm blaming, and then I'm lashing out, and there's so many different things happening, right? Because at the root of everything, one, I had no emotional boundaries. I have no emotional boundaries, and I'm getting better, right? But I didn't at that point, because, hell, that person would drive up in the driveway as it was, and I would get anxious and scared even at that, and I'd done nothing wrong. Make sure that we wash the dishes, make sure that the floors are clean. Did I do enough? Did I do enough? Did I do enough? And almost be like I'm the butler, right? Like that, nah. And I'm not saying that the other individual asked for that. That's the other messed up piece, right? Is that I did that. Now, while there are contributing factors as to why my behavior ended up going down that road, you're absolutely right. Are there contributing factors as to how they interacted with me that made me go down? Yeah, absolutely right. But we're talking about my emotional boundaries. We're talking about your emotional boundaries. All right. So what are some signs that you have weak emotional boundaries? So like I said, we have to define what our boundaries are. And so what are some signs? So easily overwhelmed emotionally, right? You're in a situation like I was in that cat's. I was emotionally just boop. Check please. Overwhelmed, right? Overwhelmed. I was scared. I was, confused, angry. Who to be angry with? I'm angry with myself, angry with them, angry with her, angry with, the cat, or what, fear. Overwhelmed, took on everything. Their confusion, my confusion, their frustration, my frustration. And as I devolved down this road of just, of emotions, from frustration or confusion to frustration to anger to depression to sadness to almost straight up fear, like I said before, we end up going down and seeing that there's more, that I end up taking on those other feelings, right? I end up taking on, those other parties' feelings, right? My mom and my dad, because they were scared, or they were, they didn't want me to be upset. Who wants your kid to be upset? And especially if they did something, and then they have their own historical past related to losing an animal, and then they're dealing with that trauma on top of, so it was just it was one of those situations. So are you easily overwhelmed, right? So you got to understand that you have to be able to draw a line and not burden yourself with others' emotions. Okay? That's the key. Like, you cannot. Like, it's yours. Did you have a bad day? I'm so sorry you had a bad day. And go about your day. Let me help you with your bad day, but I'm not going to allow that negative bad day to influence me. I used to joke around, I'm an emotional mood rock. If you're good, I'm good. If you're negative, I'm negative. That's not cool. The more I read and learn about this, that's not cool, right? Like, that just means I have no emotional boundaries. Like, I'm not a mood rock. I basically, for the last 30 some odd years at least, I've been going on this, I'm a mood rock. Like, it's the coolest thing ever. No, all I'm going about is espousing how much of an emotional idiot I am, because I'm overwhelmed by other people's emotions. I take on their emotions, right? I don't have emotional responsibility for my own between them and theirs, right? Carrying the burdens of others' emotions, it's not even my responsibility, but I do it anyway, right? So, like, why do you do that? Why do I do that? Oh, it just is. Okay. The other part where you're really going to identify is Do you find yourself like when you get in those situations, right, where you're in a group, you go to a Christmas party, family get together, not so much family get together, I mean, maybe even family get together, but you get socially anxious. Lots of people, or it can be anywhere, right? But you get socially anxious. And so when I say socially anxious, you walk into a room and you almost believe, and even you also care that everybody, like, they're looking at you, and they're looking at you, and then when they look at you, they're thinking about you, they're judging you. And so people will automatically assume, if you think that, oh my God, you must be a narcissist. You're so self-centered. You're so self-centered. No. Okay. What it is you're self-conscious. You don't care if they're thinking, and actually you don't want them to think about you, right? So if you were really self-centered, you'd want them to think about you, and you'd think you were the center of attention, and you want to be the center of attention. To be socially anxious, you feel that you're the center of attention, and they're judging you, or they're talking about you, or they're saying something about you, or they're thinking about you, and you don't want that, right? Like, I don't like Christmas. I'll give you the story. I don't like Christmas. And the reason I don't like Christmas is everybody's attention when you open up a present or a gift is at you. How are you going to react? And I'm so, am I happy enough? Am I not? Did I do the right thing? Are you good? Did I make you happy? Right? When you go to a Christmas party, you walk in, is my suit the nice suit? Did I dress correctly? Did I look fat? Do I look thin? Right? Do you become socially anxious? Do you find that you're responding as if, you know what's in the minds and the hearts of the people that are around you? You don't. Unless they tell you, you don't know. Straight up, you don't. And trust me, I'm talking like I'm big and bad. Like, I know, like, yeah, they don't know. I still do this. And I walk into Starbucks. It was the other day. I walked into Starbucks the other day. It's like a Tuesday-ish. Doesn't matter. Walked in. I'm already anxious about going into Starbucks because of the whole coronavirus COVID thing. But I go into Starbucks. And I'm like, there's a couple people that are standing there, because you can't sit in there, but they're standing there. And I'm like looking down, like, are they looking at me? Like, I came in like some shorts and some stupid like funky socks with some flip-flops. Are they looking at me? Are they thinking, what are they thinking? Like, I'm not being like, I'm trying to get ready to protect myself. They're gonna attack me, right? So it ends up being in a very confusing situation. So understand that. Socially anxious, right? Everybody's not looking over your fence into your yard, even though you feel like they are. They're not. Last part that I would really say is, and I kind of alluded to it a couple different times, is seeking approval, right? You have an emotional boundary issue if you're constantly seeking approval. Did you get the grades because you wanted the grades, or did you get the grades because somebody else wanted you to get the grades? You're seeking their approval, right? You're unable to distinguish your emotions from the emotions of the others, right? Your emotions that you can control from their emotions that you cannot control, right? You're trying to win over by pleasing them, by casting yourself in a favorable light, you're craving the approval to run your life. I've lived my life most of the time this way, being completely honest with you. My kids to some degree do this, and I'm trying to correct it with them, and I'm trying to correct it in myself. Like, I've gone through and tried to, like when I was a younger man, go through and say, hey, Mom, I got an A. Mom, look at the car I bought. Mom, I got this job in the Army. Mom, Dad, I did this. I mean, it went as far as I remember when I first introduced my first ex-wife. Weird when I say that. My first wife to my dad, or my parents, right? She's in there in the house talking, and I walked outside with my dad. We're working on a hose or something along those lines. And for me to remember this back in that day, it's 20 some odd years ago, it was impactful for me. And I remember my dad looking at me and he goes, "You're going to marry her." Dad approves. Boom, done deal. Right? Mom approves. Boom, done deal. I can marry you now. Right? There's a checkbox off. Now, was I the right person for her? No. Was she a good person? Yeah, she's a good person in her own right. Was she a good person for me? No. Was I a good person for her? No. Am I a good person? You're damn right. So, seeking approval, right? My daughter the other day tells me she got a good grade and she's putting all these things on. And I understand it as a kid. I did it too. And we're putting all the things on the fridge and like the 100 and 99 and 80 and all these different good grades on the fridge. And, you know, I stop and I'm like, you're doing this for you. Like, because I've already gone through school, but I know what she's going through because I did it to my parents. Like, I'm searching for their approval and learning the instruments and all of these different things. And the very first time in my life was before I married my second wife, where I said, I'm going to marry her whether you guys like it or not. I said it a little nicer. It was like, whatever happens, it's on me. It's not on you. I know it's a short amount of time and I'm going to own it. That was the very first time I ever did something because I chose to do something without approval from anybody else. And I sometimes slip into that, and I see my kids slip into that, like approval behavior, seeking approval, right? But the problem is when you have a social anxiety, and then you also have social anxiety from emotional perspective, emotional boundary perspective, and you're also seeking approval from everybody, from other people, you end up also creating a self-sabotaging behavior, and that derives from like a rejection attachment. So rejection attachments they get triggered, or they started, you know, when you seek out like rejection from others. Like, you know, when they say like, you want any attention, even bad attention, right? Kind of, right? I mean, you can go down the road of, if you just say bad things about me, say bad things to me, it's better than not saying anything at all. I know that doesn't make sense, but it's true, right? So you will engage in self-sabotaging behavior just to get that passionate reaction from them, right? It's not right. It's not where you want, right? But you will self-sabotage, right? It's the weirdest thing, right? Right? I will self-sabotage I've done it countless times. I've talked about it in my own little mini therapy sessions or my therapy sessions. Like I self-sabotage because I know that I don't need to go down this other road and I have to go down this road or that road or whatever the situation is. I will self-sabotage just to get the attention or the reaction that I need, right? So that leads down the whole ADHD thing where I'm going to get the dopamine and everything in my head. But this is from an emotional boundaries perspective, right? I seek approval. And so you're like, why would you then seek to have rejection, right? And like I said, the rejection attachment where you're seeking bad approval or any approval from that person or from those people, right? So it can go down a bad road. But ultimately, when you find yourself seeking the approval of others to do anything, like I said, growing up, I did it all the time. Like the main reason I didn't do, you know, drugs back in high school wasn't because they weren't available, because they were highly available. It was like, what would I do if my mom and dad found out that I was doing drugs? Like, okay. Wasn't about the fact that you could die, get addicted, or any number of other things, right? I mean, I've since developed all of those different characteristics, so that I'm highly, and that was the other part, is I would say like, you know, what would my mom or my dad say if they found out that I did this? And then on top of that, I know that I have a highly addictive personality, so if I did these things, I would disappoint them, right? I sought their approval. Instead of saying, I have a highly addictive personality, I know I'll probably get addicted and it'll screw up my life. I didn't have concern for that. It was always about how am I going to seek approval from somebody else? and you'll find yourself in situations where, you you'll do things that you didn't think you would do, or you do the right thing or the bad thing because of the approval of somebody else. Now, luckily, my anchor point, they were good people, right? But they can also be bad people. When you're seeking the approval from bad people or bad influences, right? You'll do the bad thing, right? You'll do the drive fast, do the smoking or the drinking or the drugs or the whatever, like from a high school or kid perspective, right? You'll do those bad things, or you'll be the loudmouth in class or whatever, right? So it just depends upon who's influencing you. I was seeking approval from people who are grown and things like that. But at the end of the day, when you don't get those, you want to get attention somehow, dang it, right? So when we look through that, like, you're consciously aware of what you're doing, yet the results proves that the attachment of rejection is the result. It's ultimately giving you that feeling that you're getting the attention. So now you ask yourself, like, this seems very self-centered, like your emotional boundaries seems to be very self-centered in how you do things. Well, if it's not clear, right, it does get blurred a little bit, right, when you put them together, right? So, but you have to understand what narcissism is. And I heard this a lot, because there are certain characteristics of narcissism and ADHD that get blurred because you seem very self-centered or aloof, right? But technically, narcissism, or narcissists are, they can't sense the impact of their behavior on other people. So I'm saying something and it's gonna hurt you, right? And I know it's gonna hurt you, and I'm gonna do it anyway, or I don't really actually understand how it hurts you, right? There's no boundary because they can't distinguish themselves from another individual, right? There's a difference, right? I'm seeking the approval of another individual because when they get mad or they get angry, I'm gonna feel that, right? Because I can't discern that. I'm gonna be a mood rock, right? A narcissist, right, doesn't understand, right? So they're not a mood rock. It's just a rock just bouncing off, okay? They don't get it, okay? They're going to emulate. They're going to mirror. They would mirror your behavior. They wouldn't feel your behavior. Maybe that helps a little bit, okay? So like I said, when we start doing these things and we start blaming others for our problems, and we start looking at, it ends up being because we don't have emotional boundaries. And when we don't have emotional boundaries, that's where we end up having, mental health issues, or we don't have good emotional health. We don't, develop our own autonomy, right? That's a big one, right? Like, can you sit in your own space and do you? Just you, right? Like, I started to do that. Like, I could sit, right? There's nobody here, just me. I'm gonna do me. I could sit downstairs. I could read a book. I could do whatever. I could go drive. I could go walk. I could do whatever. I'm autonomous. I don't need to be with anybody. I don't need the approval of anybody. Do I like it? Yeah. Do I need it? No, I don't. Right? It helps you from, you avoid burnout. You develop your own identity. When you no longer concern yourself with, let me paraphrase a little bit. I'm not saying that concern yourself with how you make others feel, because you want to concern yourself with how they feel. But on the other side of that, you can't burden yourself with how they feel. I'm sorry that you are upset. I am sorry that you feel bad, but I am going to move on if I can't help you, and I'm going to be okay with that because I've developed my own identity. And I'll go one step further. When you ending in a relationship, right? And it's been a long-term relationship, whether you're married, whether it's a baby mama, daddy mama, whatever. I mean, daddy mama, baby daddy, whatever, right? And you're in that relationship and you get out of that relationship. And if it's 1 year, it's 2 years, it's 10 years, it's 13 years, it's 12, it's 20, it's 30 years, right? You no longer, if you don't have good emotional boundaries in the first place, you sure as hell you haven't developed an identity unto yourself because you've taken on theirs. How do they feel? How are they doing? How is this? And so on and so forth. So you have to develop your own identity before you can mix into something else. It's kind of like, I'm leaving my neighborhood. My fences are destroyed in my house. My property line's a complete hot mess. And I'm going to go take that same house, pick it up, and go put it in another neighborhood and expect it to be completely normal and okay and whole. It ain't gonna work, right? You can't go get a new neighbor and then have no boundaries, no fence line, walking in, walking out of the fence. I mean, you can't. It just doesn't make sense if you think about it in a physically, and it doesn't make sense if you actually think about it emotionally, right? You have to be right with yourself. So my advice to anybody who's getting out of a relationship is it's okay to be solo, right? And in every relationship, you're going to have some seepage of those emotional boundaries, right? That's where you end up with some of the emotional baggage. So, right, you're going to need time to fix that fence, right? You're not just going to have another neighbor move right on in and you got big old gaping holes in your fence, because then what's going to happen? They're just going to make those holes bigger. They're just going to keep on doing the same thing that was done before. You're still going to feel violated. Your emotional boundaries are still going to be crossed, right? You're still not going to feel validated. And you're going to end up in the same situation. So you have to shore up the fence, put the wood slats back on, whatever, right? Close all the holes in your fence. Maybe get a stronger wood, whatever, right? Get stronger in here, in here. When you're good here, then go talk to the neighbor next door and have a barbecue, right? Do whatever you want to do. But you have to be good here. And I hope that makes sense, right? So you have to define those boundaries, what they are for you. And I can't define them for you. You can't define them for me. But you have to define some boundaries. You have to communicate those boundaries with the people you're closest to. And if you need help, ask for help. They can help you. Can't do it for you, but they sure as heck can help you, right? And most importantly is you have to allow like waypoints. Like you're going down a road, a twisty road, and before you get to that twisty road, there's signs that say there's a twisty road ahead. You gotta know, like you gotta put signs up in your journey to say, we got a social anxiety situation ahead. You may want to shore up some of the fence line or get ready or do your process, meditate, do yoga. I don't know what it is, whatever. Right? And then when you pass that line, put an anchor in the ground. If I get here, we're in a bad sitch, right? Bad situation, we get here. Because if we go further, that's when we end up in the self-destructive behavior, right? True story and a big thing for me, right? I was younger days and I went to a Christmas party, social anxiety situation. I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel smart enough. I didn't feel like I dressed well enough. It was one of my first corporate things, right? And I felt it. And then I kept going, right? I kept seeing the markers and I kept going, not caring, didn't slow down. Right? You start doing behavior that's not your characteristic behavior. I started having one too many drinks, right? Until what? Self-destructive behavior started happening. Right? I'm slurring words. I'm all over the place. Now, this is at a work function. I even called somebody, hey, this is the bee that I work with. You know, so you start to think now, from that point on, that's a massive anchor. You'll never find me at a corporate function drinking again. Now, did I go too far one way? Probably, right? It's not don't drink at all. It's maybe have one drink, right? It's not black or it's not white. Okay. But what I'm saying is make sure that you have markers so that you don't end up down the road of being self-destructive just because you're not getting it. Don't put yourself in a situation that you don't think you can handle emotionally. And if you have a spouse and you're still dealing with these things and you have a problem with your emotional boundaries, right? You should love them and they should love you enough to sit down and go, look, I have emotional boundary problems. And when you came in, I cared about everything that you were saying. I cared so much that I wanted to fix it so much that you stopped hurting, but I could not process your pain, your anger, your frustration, your emotion, and mine. It was bleeding onto my fence, right? And lastly, like I said again, right? Why are we seeking approval from somebody else? Don't. Is it nice to have it? Yes. Get approval? Nice. It's good to feel it. Don't make it a necessity. You know what the right thing to do is by now. If you're a kid and you're going through it and you have kids, that's your job as a parent to make sure that they understand the difference between, right? And you can sit down and you can trace all of these things back down to one incident, two incidents, whether you did it happened to you as a kid, it happened to you as an adult, whatever the case is. And you don't have, and this is one thing that I think as parents, we don't enforce enough. Like we teach them the math and the writing and the reading and the arithmetic and we teach them how to ride bikes and we teach them, dating and da 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 da. But do we ever sit down and teach our kids, look, here are the basics of psychology? No. Why? Because most of us don't understand it. Most of us don't even take the time to go through it. Most of us don't understand the difference between an emotional boundary and a personal boundary. Is it the one and the same? Is it? Maybe it's not. We need to sit down and talk about it. We need to talk about communication skills. We need to talk about emotional boundaries. We need to talk about these things so that we don't have this ever rising and ever climbing, culture of divorce and all those different things that are going on in the world, right? Of loneliness. As a connected world as we are, we're so more disconnected emotionally because we don't learn these skills of being connected and learning, not to seek approval from others and not to become anxious and overwhelmed by situations and not to take on, these things. We're emotionally stunted. I am emotionally stunted. I was emotionally stunted from a young child all the way up going through, and I've never learned anything else. So what is my goal? My goal and what makes me successful is I'm going to teach my kids how to have emotional boundaries, how to say, hey, Dad, I'm sorry you had a bad day. I love you more than anything in this world, but I'm going to leave you to deal with that, and I'll come back later. And it's going to be okay to do that. Right? They don't need to be your crutch. Hey, Mom, I'm sorry that X, Y, and Z is happening. I'm sorry that this is happening and you feel sad. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Move on. Be happy. Go play. Go jump on a trampoline. Go play, ride on a bike, whatever. And be okay with that. And as a parent, you got to be okay with that. You should be okay with that. You should actually demand that they are not there to parent you. Okay? So, as we close up, now, this is episode 6, the inaugural YouTube posting of it. So I'm going to put the YouTube, I'm going to put Facebook when we get it posted out there. And once again, as always, it's going to be on the same avenues to get access to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. From the bottom of my heart, I do hope you're enjoying this podcast. I hope it's adding value to your life. I know it's adding value as I research and I go through this and I share what I learn. I know that it's adding value to some people that are close to me, and I want to make sure that it's getting out there and you're finding value. All right. So as always, you've listened to the Renaissance Daddy podcast. If you've loved this episode, please head over to Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, YouTube, or and rate and subscribe. Leave a review. That's very much appreciated. Bottom of my heart, it really is. And if you're feeling extra generous and love the content, please feel free to donate to the cause and keep this thing going. So, as always, is your host, Jay. Keep spreading the love and not the hate.